Welcome, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Jen Hilman, and today I am launching the first of my three-part How to Deep Tissue series. So in this video, we will be exploring deep tissue techniques to relax the whole back. And I'm so grateful to have my good friend Maurissa Lynn here as my lovely massage model. Maressa is an empowerment and sensuality guide. You can find her on Facebook, as well as the lighttribeyoga.com. Links are below. You can check out her work. Go ahead and like this video and leave me a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Grab yourself a partner and let's get ready to explore these deep tissue techniques for the back. So to begin our session today, I am going to start with Maressa lying face down. I'm just starting at the head. I like to begin with some compression, just to stretch the spine and begin to give my partner a chance to relax on the table. So just starting at the head, I'll begin with my hands right at the top of the shoulder and leaning in with a downward pressure. So I'm kind of going down towards the table and down towards her hips. So my pressure is at a bit of an angle. Leaning my weight in through the heel of my hand and the palms. Just giving a nice lengthening compression there. Then I'll begin to walk my hands down the back. And I'll repeat the same action. So I'll follow this journey all the way down to the low back. Just taking it one step at a time, leaning in and giving that stretching compression before I move to the next spot. So this is a very grounding action, and it's a nice way to begin making contact with your partner so they can get used to your touch and start to relax. And moving slowly allows for the fascia to start to respond and relax as you stretch and lengthen the spine. So coming all the way down to the low back, I'm going to place one hand right down the middle on top of the sacrum. My pressure is at a downward angle so that I'm lengthening and creating space along the low back. Coming along the side of the table, I'm going to gently cup my fingers along the base of her spine and just give a gentle traction. So I'm pressing down with my hand on her sacrum and gently stretching from the base of her skull and tuning in deeply, stretching slowly. This will allow for length and space down the entire spine from top to bottom. I'll slowly release, coming all the way up to the base of the spine, or to the base of the skull, just using my fingertips to gently massage around that occipital ridge. So this is an area that can be pretty tender, a little sensitive, can be quite tight. So especially in this beginning phase of the massage, I'm just working with a medium, even to a light amount of pressure. I'm just warming up the tissue. We can give it a nice little traction pull to close. And then we can begin with some effleurage to warm up the superficial muscles. So I'm warming some oil between my hands, and I'll just start by applying the oil with long, smooth strokes from the top to the bottom of her back, and just making sure to spread the oil evenly across the skin I try to use enough oil that I have a smooth and even glide across the skin without being too slippery or slick. And if you find that maybe you got a little too much oil and you need to spread it out a little more, you can, continue to spread that oil down the arms, just so you have a chance to distribute it more evenly. And it always feels good to have your arms massaged as well as your back. So it's just another way to kind of thin out and distribute the oil across the skin. Now, anytime that you are doing deep tissue massage, it's extremely important to start out working the superficial muscles, because we want to warm up the body and start to increase the blood flow and start to relax those superficial layers so that we can work our way more deeply into the deeper layers of muscle tissue, and that's when we can start to get some of those deep releases. So this is a good time to just practice your effleurage, just working on warming it up. You can do both sides simultaneously or alternating. So after you take the time to warm up with a little bit of effleurage, we can begin to move into more focused work. So oftentimes people are going to have tension across the tops of the shoulders and the neck. That's one of the most common areas of complaint. So I like to start by tracing the line across the top of the trapezius. So this is one of our heavy lifters that often gets tight whenever we're sitting at the computer or hunching forward. So as you trace this line across the top of the shoulders, you'll likely find one or two or multiple places that feel those little knots. So initially we don't need to plunge right in to those particular knots, but we can take a little time to just glide across them and survey the land and just start to notice where those tight places are. And then you can begin to shorten your strokes, slowly starting to hone in on the spot where you feel the most tension. And then begin to settle into that spot, giving it a firm and steady pressure. Now, a common misconception about deep tissue massage is that it has to hurt. And while it may be uncomfortable or hurt so good, in my opinion, we don't want to push the person into the point of pain, because it becomes counterproductive as the body will coil and resist the work that we're trying to do. So after working the top of the trap, I'll begin to work my way across the rhomboids, working the space between the shoulder blades, which of course is another area that can get really tight and crunchy. So we want to basically approach the rhomboids in the same way, using your thumbs to glide from the spine out to the edge of the scapula. And again, you may find quite a few places that feel tight, a little crunchy. Sometimes it feels like little ski moguls that your thumbs are just bumping up and down along knots. And so this is a chance to survey the landscape. Feel what you feel. Notice what's going on below your fingertips. And we start with that superficial work, peering below the surface. and start to make note of what areas need a little more work. And after doing that warm-up stroke a few times, you can start to zero in on the places that seem the most tight. And the process of zeroing in is slow and patient. So I start by making my thumb strokes shorter and shorter, zeroing in on the tight spot. And once I feel like I've landed right at the heart of it, I can lean in with a steady and firm pressure. But be mindful what you notice, because if your partner's body seems to flinch or to clench up, you may be using too much pressure, and it would be better to back out of it a little bit and ease in a little bit slower. So even though we're doing this deep work, and it can be uncomfortable, it can be intense, we want to approach it with a compassionate touch. So our job is not to just bulldoze our way into the body, but rather to start slowly to build trust and comfort and build into that state of relaxation. Okay, so I had a little flinch there, you may have noticed, and that's usually going to be an indicator that, we've come across a spot that's a little tight, a little more sensitive than others. So this might be a hot spot that we want to focus in on. But again, if I know that it's kind of a hot spot, I want to approach it gently. So here I'm using my forefingers as opposed to the thumb, because this will allow me to get a strong and direct pressure, but not quite as intense as using the thumb on its own. So I like changing up the way that I'm using my hands, which not only saves my thumbs, but it changes the experience and the amount of pressure and the direction of the pressure based on how I'm using my hands as a tool. So another tool that I like to use is the flat parts of my knuckles. So I'll call this kind of like a puppy paw or a kitty paw. Just gently curling the fingers in and then using the flat parts of my knuckles to apply a broad pressure. You can also get a firm amount of leverage, so you can get deep without being too direct or too specific. So this is a nice way to work a broad area all at once. And using the puppy paw also allows you to work the thumb into the stroke as well. So the knuckles come across the front and the thumbs follow behind. So that allows you to get a little bit more specific, directing where you put the pressure with your thumb. So this is a great technique for working across the rhomboids or into the low back, so we can revisit this as well. Now, continuing the journey down the back, this upper middle back can also carry a lot of tension as a result of hunching, standing a lot, moving or lifting heavy things. Maressa is a mom, so she's lifting a heavy kid, and it can wear on the mid and upper back. So as you work your way down beyond the shoulder blade, this is another great area to use that puppy paw, or the flat parts of the knuckle, creating a broad, wide pressure that improves and increases the circulation and starts to warm up the more superficial muscles. And once that starts to feel loose and warmed up, you'll start to notice the skin in the area turning a little pink. That is the sign that blood is flooding into the area. So you can start to do some more focused work with the thumbs. So oftentimes what you'll find, people are going to have kind of a large ridge moving up and down the spine. So in this mid-back, you can come towards the medial side of that ridge, which would be, just to the side of the spine. And that will allow you to work into some of the connective tissue that's connecting this group of muscles to the actual spinal processes. And this will allow you to get a fairly deep pressure with the thumb. And as you're working your way through your partner's body, you may come across areas that feel like knots or a little concentrated areas of tension, in which case you can shorten your stroke and start to zero in on that area and give it a more sustained and specific pressure. And if you're ever unsure, it's always good practice to just check in with your partner about the pressure and just see, does that feel good? Do you want more? Do you want less? It's always nice to check in with your partner and make sure that their comfort is at the front of your mind. Now, of course, when it comes to deep tissue work, we don't want to rely solely on the thumbs, because that's going to wear you out over time, that's going to fatigue you throughout the day, and that is going to become, chronic injury or, chronic discomfort in the joint over time. So of course, it's always great to be able to lean into the forearm and the elbow, and especially working these areas along the spine is a great way to come in with the forearm. So I'm starting here at the very top of the shoulder, and my pressure is very direct, and I'm leaning in towards her body. So this is allowing me to revisit some of the areas that we've already worked, but now I'm using a stronger tool, which is my forearm and my elbow. So as I gently glide my forearm across the top of her shoulder, I'm going to slowly begin to change the angle of my forearm as I come into the space between the spine and the shoulder blade. So as I rotate my elbow around, now the pointy part of my elbow is right alongside her spine. Now, it's important when you're working with the forearm and the elbow that you be extremely mindful of your pressure, because you can get a very strong amount of leverage here. And again, we don't want to just plow our way into the body, but rather work slowly and intentionally. So you can do that pass with the forearm as many times as you like. One pattern that I like to use is kind of a triangular pattern, tracing the overall shape of the trapezius. So just as we did before, coming in across the top of the shoulder, rotating the angle of the forearm, and coming down along the edge of the spine. And as you come to about the apex of the thoracic curve, at about an angle from the tip of the shoulder blade, you can glide that forearm all the way down to the shoulder and cover this whole broad area. And one simple rotation puts you back in place to trace the line again. So coming up over the top of the shoulder, slowly rotating the forearm, coming down to that thoracic curve, and then tracing the line down off the shoulder. And then one simple rotation puts you back at the beginning. So that's a nice little flow. From here you can move even further down the back. And something to be aware of as you are using the forearm and the elbow, that pointy part of your elbow, that prominence there, is going to deliver the most amount of pressure, and it's a very specific pressure. So you want to be mindful about using that elbow in moments when you specifically want to get that deep, direct pressure. So I'm going to move along to the side of her body here, just giving me a little more leverage to start working the lower part of the back. And this area of the back I haven't been touching as much, so I want to go back to those long, smooth effleurage type strokes to visit and greet the lower part of the back and just make sure that there's plenty of circulation and warmth in the body there. So I always enjoy doing a little petrissage in the low back, kneading that quadratus lumborum, and working those attachments along the spine. So this is a little bit deeper than just the effleurage. It's a little more focused and specific, but still broad enough that it's part of our warm-up. Of course, the low back is another area where people can hold a lot of tension. So this is probably going to be your second most common area of complaint. So it's important to have these tools in your toolbox to be able to loosen up tension in the low back. So here I'm using the puppy paw to make large sweeping motions along the length of the spine and coming down across the top of the hip. So not quite getting into the glutes, but just working that meaty tissue just across the very top of the hip. And these are going to be the muscle groups that are leading into like the sciatic, the deep rotators in the hips and glutes. So we're getting deeper and deeper as we go. Now coming back into the forearms, there's a great technique I like to do here. So coming alongside the body, I'll take a nice wide stance so I can lunge low. And coming in with the knife edge of my hand, I'm leaning in with my forearm. Leaning into that soft space between the top of the hip and the bottom of the ribs, so leaning right into the QL. So again, I'm using my forearm, which is going to give me a broader pressure than the prominence of my elbow specifically. So leaning in here, I'm really getting that broad pressure with the forearm. Now, once my elbow has come in contact with her skin, and I'm making contact with the muscle, we can drive that pressure deeper simply by bending the elbow. And that's going to allow you to get even deeper below the QL into some of the other attachments that are deeper in the body. So just slowly coming out of that maneuver as gently as you went in. And of course you can repeat that action with the second arm. So starting with the pinky edge, the knife edge of the hand, gliding the forearm all the way across the low back until your elbow kind of comes into play. Then gently Bend into the elbow, driving that pressure deeper. Now, something to note with this bottom arm, I'm using my forearm to anchor her pelvis, and I have just a slight downward pressure. So as one arm is going across, the other is anchoring in the opposite direction. So that gives us a little bit of a fascial stretch at the same time that she's receiving this deep pressure. So after moving through that pass a few times, I like to come in with the top parts of my knuckles and just make some nice broad downward strokes. So we go from superficial to deep and back to superficial. And once I've completed this journey from the top down to the low back, I like to come in and do a nice, deep, long stroke from the base of the spine all the way up to the top of the shoulder. I'm just leaning my weight in. I'm really able to lean into the heel of my hand as I slowly glide my hand all the way across the top of the shoulder. Then you can hook your fingertips around the top of the traps and using alternating hands, knead across the top of the shoulder. So you can do one hand at a time, leaning back, stretching back as you go. You can also work more of a petrissage and actually squeeze into the muscles. And you may find, even to the front of the neck or to the front of the shoulder, a little bit of tension in there. So sometimes I like to just hook my fingers in, get a nice steady grip, lean back with my body weight and give it a nice stretch. And coming all the way out to the shoulder, I like to use, again, the broad, flat parts of the knuckle and just alternating my hands, tracing the line of the scapula. So going from the broad edge of the scapula down to the shoulder. Then we can come all the way around. So here I'm working her left side. So I'm going to come to the right side of the table. And here you have a really nice access point to be able to massage the back of the neck. So this is another area that I'll get into some like mini petrissage. So it's still that nice kneading motion, but I'm using small fingers, small strokes to massage along the edge of the neck. And coming all the way up. You can come back to a nice little traction pull. And then we can prepare to move to the second side. So as you prepare to move to the second side, you can restart this video and just retrace the steps that we did on the previous side. But to recap, we're starting with strokes across the top of the trap, slowly zeroing in on those tight spots, any particular knots that you feel, then slowing it down and leaning in with a steady, sustained pressure into those specific tight places. And you can use the thumbs to survey the land of the rhomboids, working that space between the shoulder blades. And again, using this as a chance to observe and notice any particular tight spots you feel, then slowly starting to zero in on it and give it that sustained pressure. Of course, we've got our puppy paws that will allow you to work a more broad and general pressure. And you can incorporate the thumbs into that stroke as well. Working your way down into the mid-back. I like to use the puppy paws to really warm it up, loosening things up in this area, and then it's a great time to start to bring in the forearm. Coming in across the top of the shoulder, we worked our way down to the mid-back, and then tracing that line down to the shoulder and giving it just that little rotation in the forearm so you come back to the top of the shoulder. So you can work that sequence. And then you can even work on bringing the forearm all the way down into the low back as you prepare to move into this lower half of the spine. You can use your puppy paws here to warm it up. Coming alongside the table, you've got your petrissage. Again, starting to work deeper and deeper as you go. Then you have your forearm technique, coming right into the QL, bending the elbow to give you more direct and specific pressure. You can do that with both hands, and just working into those tight spots. We go from specific to broad, and then you can take that nice long stroke up to the top of the shoulder. And this is a great moment to stretch and massage the tops of the traps, the tops of the shoulders, and even lean back for a stretch. And then you've got your broad knuckles coming across the back of the shoulder blade. And then you can work your way alongside the table and start to work the side of the neck. So that's just a little sequence for you to start to play with and exploring these deep tissue techniques. I hope that you've enjoyed following along with me today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next of our How To Deep Tissue series. Special thanks to Miss Maurissa Lynn. Check out her links below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.